Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. Joining me today in the studio are my colleagues, Geoff Pender. Hey, Geoff.
Hey, Adam.
And Bobby Harrison.
Hey, guys. How are y'all doing?
Hey, Bobby.
You know, we're making it. We're making it. We're at the very, very end of what has been, I mean, it's of course the first term or the first year in a new term. It's always a longer session by number of days, 120 days. But this one has been especially contentious and just in the mud on so many issues, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But now there's a tunnel at the end of the light.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a light at the end of the tunnel. You just don't know if it's sunlight or a train coming.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, it's been a lot of fun covering this session with y'all. It's these last few days of any given legislative session, even the ones that people may consider slower, quote unquote slower, which is certainly not this one, but even those, it's just a slog. There's a lot of fighting. There's intra-party fighting. There's House versus Senate fighting. The governor often wades in. It's just a lot of posturing, a lot of drawing lines, and in the end, it all usually seems to work out. They will have a budget. They will come to an agreement or not on some of the major issues that they're debating, and that's what I want to talk about with y'all today, because we are very much in the throes of the final sort of slog of the session, where there is a lot of both public and behind the scenes just slinging of arrows, and it's been kind of nasty these last few days. But before we get into these major issues with y'all, I want to just point out to anybody listening that we are recording this episode on Friday morning of April 26th. So this episode will publish on Monday, April 29th. Everything that we say in this episode may be moot or just completely wrong by Monday morning. So
but Adam, let me say that it probably won't be. We're probably gonna be right on point. So listen anyway.
That's right. Well, I think what I want to do is talk about these major issues and talk about specifically some of the developments on them over the past week. Yeah, that's what we do at this weekly podcast. We talk about the previous week typically. So we're gonna stick to that, and we'll try to forecast as best we can what we think could happen in the early part of the week that you're listening to this episode in, the week of April 29th. But again, just know this time of year always, it doesn't just change by the day, it often changes by the hour, and sometimes every half hour. So we'll do our best to kind of keep it focused on the week previous, and then we'll be clear about whenever we're trying to forecast what's going to happen next. Let's start with the big one. This is probably in podcast hosting terms, this is not the smartest thing to do. You want to talk about the thing that people are most zoned in on last to keep people listening, but let's flip it, because it is the most important. It's the most contentious debate. It's one of the most transformative policy proposals, as we've said, in decades. Geoff, I'm going to start with you talking about Medicaid expansion. Of course, as anybody who's listening probably knows by now, Mississippi lawmakers are earnestly debating expanding Medicaid for the first time since the ACA was passed and implemented more than 10 years ago. A lot of political hand-wringing about what they should do, what they shouldn't do. We are now down to, unbelievably perhaps, whether or not this can get one or two little more tweaks and provisions worked out between House Republicans and Senate Republicans. But as we sit here today, the latest is that the Senate is drafting a compromise proposal that, gets very much closer to that final sort of compromise that would be a true expansion plan. Talk a little bit, though, Geoff, about what happened last week, because there was a lot of movement. The fact that I think we can say that about the Senate right now is pretty it was a huge change over the course of the last week.
Yeah, at least what we've heard now, until until we see said draft. There have been strong rumors of a draft, I guess, at this point. But, we saw last week they came in essentially at the spot they've been in for weeks.
Months, perhaps. Yeah.
Months, perhaps. pretty far apart. The House wants to do what is essentially full ACA Medicaid expansion. It would cover, estimates vary, but probably 200,000 people, up to 138% of the federal poverty level, which that's nearly 21,000 for an individual. The Senate wanted to do something much, much smaller, would, by their estimate, cover 40,000 people or so. The House plan would take advantage of about $1 billion a year the feds would pay towards doing this. The Senate, what they initially came up with, would not take that federal money. That has been the major sticking point. What we saw this week when they held their first real powwow in public, which is kind of rare, the House came with a counteroffer and said, if you go with us to 138% to people making up to 21 grand, we'll, as you wanted, we'll keep the private insurance exchange, and people from 100% of poverty to 138 will stay on private insurance. We'll still be able to get that $1 billion a year in federal money. We'll use that money to further subsidize the private policies these people are getting. So it's kind of split in the middle. That leaves, we're hearing maybe the Senate's open to doing some hybrid model like that. That leaves another major sticking point, is the Senate wanted to have a really stringent work requirement where we'd spend millions of dollars to ride herd and make sure like 4 times a year that whoever's on this program is working at least 30 hours a week. That would automatically, for now, the federal government has not been approving those work requirements.
13 other states have tried that.
And they got rid of all the ones that had been approved.
Yeah, 13 states had tried it and got shut down.
Yeah, so it's been called a poison pill that, best case would put off any expansion for, at least a year till maybe a new administration would approve that, but we don't know. And so the House has said, we want a work requirement ourselves, but, let's be realistic, it's not going to fly. So I guess that's been the last, from what we've heard as far as progress made, that's still a major sticking point. And
really the last final remaining sticking point, if what we've heard about the rest of it is true.
There are compromises available, and what we're doing, 40 other states have done this. We're not reinventing the wheel, and I think what maybe is being discussed right now is, again, splitting the difference and have what they're calling a North Carolina deal that says we're requesting a stringent work requirement. We want one. And at such time that the federal government starts approving them, we shall go after one. But in the meantime, the program would get up and running and people would be covered with insurance.
And I'll say I wrote a story about North Carolina 3 weeks ago now, I guess. I talked to 2 of the main Republican lawmakers in that state about how they got around the work requirement. I mean, they both, it sounded like most every Republican in that legislature, North Carolina's legislature, they all wanted a work requirement. But like you just said about the deliberations here in Mississippi, they kind of said to each other, look, we want this, but the feds aren't going to approve it. Let's be realistic and think about, they got creative. That's how I put it. They thought about some creative ways to incentivize and sort of boost work and encourage work among the people who would be covered on their new expansion Medicaid plan, but it's not a requirement. And one of those ways was they created this, or they're still in the efforts of the process of, it's really a public-private sort of study commission to figure out how to start a big jobs training program that's optional. But, the idea is you can take people who are on Medicaid expansion who may not have access to a good quality job because of their education or because of or their health, of course. And so you get them the health care first and foremost so they can, in theory, be healthy. They can prevent the harder stuff on them later in their lives, and then get them into skills training, or there's even talks right now about community college being paid for North Carolinians in the program, which is not a foreign concept to even big time Republicans here in Mississippi. So they got creative. They're like, how can we use this federal money that we can draw down with expanding Medicaid and create programs that do encourage and sort of incentivize work in a way that isn't mandatory for people, but it will be something that, we can be smart about it and really get people to buy in.
And again, looking at other states, I mean, we're not the first to do this. There were work requirements for several years, and these were looked at and everything. And the studies I've seen on them showed that they did not make a difference one way or the other on workforce participation among that population. The only program to date, Medicaid expansion program work deal, that has moved the needle, I think, is in Montana. Now, it's similar to what North Carolina
modeled theirs after
Montana has done it enough that they can study the impact. It is the only one that has increased workforce participation, and it's moved the needle by rolling 3 to 6%, which that's huge. I mean, we're dead last in the country in workforce participation, something Lieutenant Governor Hoseman mentions every other sentence. And here is a model that is the only one that has shown to move that needle. So, prior to this, again, there's other states to look at. I don't know. It almost seemed like the Senate looked around and by their own admission, sort of modeled theirs after Georgia, which has been a disaster.
Just
almost like, let's look around and find the one that has absolutely pretty much failed.
Tanked. And
Georgia is still fighting and has a work requirement and some other things going on to where it's not true expansion. They don't get the federal money. And one of the worst things to date, them trying to ride herd on the work requirement and all that, that's where they spent all their money.
Yeah.
They've spent millions of dollars so far, and 90% have gone to administration and consultants to make sure people are working.
And how many people are actually on the rolls?
And at this point, I don't know, maybe they had estimated 100 or 150,000 would be eligible, and at this point, they've managed to provide coverage to about 4,000 people. So it's been a disaster, and one would think that's not the state to model your program.
Probably not.
You talked about the conference committee where the 3 House negotiators and 3 Senate negotiators meet to try to hash out the differences that y'all been talking about. And we have, even though it's in the joint rules that we have open conferences in the Mississippi legislature, we hadn't really had any in a long time. And this was a rare experience to see one on especially such a big issue. But I think it served a purpose, and I think it helped to move the ball. I think that the Senate, once they got into the open conference and they started talking about their position, and the numbers just don't make sense. You're going to cover fewer people and cost more money with a Senate plan than you're going to cover with a House plan. And so I think that, they had that open conference, and I think they said, we don't want to do that anymore. And I think that kind of spurred more negotiations on their part. And plus, one other thing I think came out of that open conference is I think the Senate leadership does want to do something. I think they want to pass something, and they realize that what they were touting, what they were supporting, just in a lot of ways just didn't make sense. So we're going to see now if they can come up with a solution, a compromise that they can get through their chamber, and then we'll all be watching to see what the governor does, whether he vetoes it or lets it become law. And look, we talk about the work requirement, and that's, I understand, for some people that's an important thing, but think about it. Most of these people who are going to apply for Medicaid under Medicaid expansion are working. You make between 100 and 138% of the federal poverty level. You have an income in some places, not a great income, but you have an income, so they're working. So I think in a lot of ways it's kind of a what's the word for not a real issue?
Red herring.
Yeah, thanks.
You're right, and we've seen studies, and these are Mississippi-specific studies that show that a majority, and some other studies have an even higher majority of people who would qualify for this expansion program are working or are looking for work right now. It's not that's been the case consistently in every other state that's done this too. These are the majority of these people are working. Now, there's also an argument that I think is important that not a lot of Republicans love having this argument, but it's real, is that for people who aren't working, there can be very legitimate reasons for them not working, not the least of which is them not being healthy or having the health to keep steady work.
Or child care issues is another.
Child care is another one. That's something that we just talked about in North Carolina. They got creative, and they're talking about providing child care vouchers with that federal money they're getting to people on the program so that they can go out and they can have the ability to afford child care. And that's very real, by the way. There are people in Mississippi every day who are having this dilemma where the cost of child care to send their kids to daycare or get a sitter or whatever is more expensive than what they could make in a minimum wage job working 40 hours a week. That is true. That is just the fact.
I mean, Medicaid aside, that's been identified as one of the major problems with our super low workforce.
That's right.
Participation. And when we've set up a program and funded a program to help with that, I think not too long ago, looking at it, it provided help to 21,000 families when they estimated, 150,000 needed it.
Yeah.
So, not made much of a dent in that.
And look, for over a decade, the main argument Governor Reeves and others who opposed Medicaid expansion used was that the state can't afford it. And that's another one of those issues as a Fox issue. Now, I mean, there's more than enough money to expand Medicaid with the enhanced federal match that provided as an incentive. That's going to be about $700 million over 2 years. You can take that money, expand Medicaid, and still probably have money left over to do innovative stuff with child care and workforce training programs that the legislature for years has said is important things for them to do.
That's right. There are creative ways around it. Just look at these other states. Look at the red states. I think that's what's happening. It sounds like that the people who are really sort of negotiating this, the Republican conferees, they're looking at these other states and trying to figure out if there's something they can work out here. Before we move on to a couple other issues, just again, this is I hate to have to preface it this way, but this could change. But what we're really looking at is if the Senate can meet the House closer to where they are on a work requirement, and if they get something done on the 138% match to draw down that full force of the federal matching dollars. If they get that bill out of conference, what happens next is the House votes on it first on the floor. We believe that the House has plenty of room there. They overwhelmingly passed the plan the first time, and from there it'll move over to the Senate, where the votes may be a little bit tougher to get. That's what we've heard. And the key to remember, Bobby, you just mentioned, is that Governor Tate Reeves, who you could say is the reason we haven't done this to this point in Mississippi, he has vowed to veto anything that the legislature sends. So they're really trying to get 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate in order to protect themselves against a veto. And then I guess we can. I'm kind of curious to ask you all this question. I'm of the mind that it doesn't matter how many votes they get, whether they have the veto override vote or not. I think Tate Reeves is going to veto and make them vote again.
Yeah, and I hate to bring up another issue and start talking about legislative deadlines, but we're getting to the point in the session, so late in the session, that there's a possibility, unless the legislature takes some other actions, that they could finally pass this bill. Just for hypothetically speaking, let's say they pass it, and it's going to be so late in the session that they're going to go home before the governor vetoes it. And so we could theoretically have a situation where you'd have a bill passed by the legislature to expand Medicaid, vetoed by the governor, and the legislature would not be in position to do anything about that veto until the 2025 session begins in January. There's an option they have that would also take a 2/3 vote to do what they call, Jeff, extend the session on paper.
On paper, yeah.
So they can set a time to come back to address any vetoes.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to watch for, because otherwise it could be just really a kind of an incredible set of circumstances. You expand Medicaid, the governor vetoes it, and it's kind of just in a holding pattern for more than half a year.
Yeah. Jeff, do you think Tate vetoes it regardless?
My guess would be yes. I mean, I've not talked with anyone in the legislature who harbors much doubt there, and like Bobby said, you get into timing. If they're still in session and he vetoes it, he has to do so within 5 days, and they can come back in and vote to override it. If they go home and he vetoes it, or if they leave, he's got 15 days out of session to veto it. I have little doubt he would
wait as long as he could.
You're right. So
plus, Jeff, the session is scheduled to end
May 5th, Sunday.
So you're getting to the point where, they're not going to have time to pass it within that 5-day period.
Right.
Because there's a lot of steps in that process. So the legislature is going to have to do something about the length of the session, vote to extend it, or either it's going to be kind of an unusual situation.
Yeah. Well,
kind of remind me about the the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, which is something we may be talking about later in this podcast. But if you remember, back in '97, the legislature passed that. The governor vetoed it while they were out of session, but he took the unusual step of calling a special session to allow them to come back.
To let them come in and override his veto.
Which they did. I don't think Governor Reeves would do that.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. The timing is definitely interesting and very much part of this. And like you said, that would take a 2/3 vote on its own from both chambers.
For Speaker White alluded to, maybe he didn't say it in reference to a governor veto, but he alluded to the possibility of extending the session on paper, as they say, just a couple of days ago.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Like I said, by the time you're listening to this podcast, we may have a clear idea of the timeline, anyways. But as we sit here on Friday, the 26th, that's where we are. All right, so let's talk about a couple other big issues really quickly. We won't spend as much time on these, but they're very important, and they both have played into, I think, the Medicaid expansion debate as well as everything else that's still on the table. Let's start with education funding. Bobby, you have taken the lead for us covering this issue this session. The House introduced a complete rewrite of the way that the state would fund public education. They initially proposed getting rid of an objective funding formula like we currently have right now with the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAEP. And the Senate did not want that at all. They, in fact, doubled down on their commitment to MAEP with some tweaks and some additional proposed funding to it. So that seemed for a long time like that could really end up being an impasse that may not be solved this year, but over the last week we have some real movement on that. Tell us where we are.
Yeah, I think that the Senate, realizing that the House appeared ready to leave the session without funding education at all, which would just create all sorts of chaos, came to the table and agreed to rewrite or scrap, whatever, how you want to reference it, the longstanding Mississippi Adequate Education Program. But in doing so, they set some parameters, and one of those parameters was that there would be an objective funding formula. And what does that actually mean? Under the House plan, in the House could just sort of come up with an amount of money they said it was needed to fully fund education.
It was going to leave it in the hands of the legislature to decide how much a base cost was as a starting place, and
So the Senate came up with and the House as we understand it, has agreed to it, and a different objective funding formula than MAEP, but one that is sort of based, not sort of, but is based on average teacher salaries. The schools would get so much per student based on the average teacher salary, and so it's going to take elements of the House plan that a lot of education supporters, public education supporters, liked and said were good. A good concept to place more money into education based on poverty, other issues that might make it students more difficult to educate, such as students who English is a second language for them, and so it would provide more money for some of those categories. But there would be an objective funding formula that a lot of education supporters said was important to not leave that in the hands of politicians, and so it appears we have a compromise on that's probably going to be passed in the coming days, and it'll be the MAP, but sort of the concept of the objective funding formula will survive MAP.
Yeah. Just kind of an interesting. The process of that is kind of interesting. We were just talking about like end of session sort of votes and getting the necessary votes, but funding formula bills died. They were dead. So what the legislature is having to do to take up this bill at this point so late in the session is they have to get a 2/3 vote in both the Senate and the House. They already got it in the Senate to suspend the rules to basically introduce these new bills.
That's right.
This is one of them. Education is one of them. The second one is PERS. The public employee retirement system. Big point of debate. Going into session, Delbert Hosemann, Lieutenant Governor, said that this was the biggest issue facing lawmakers this year. PERS as a system has some really, really deep financial problems that could absolutely affect the long-term fiscal viability of the state as a whole. What are they, $15 billion in debt right now? Is that right?
No, they have, let's see, assets are about $33 billion with a B, and debt of about $25 billion.
25. Okay, I was off just a little bit there. My bad.
Not in debt, but I get what's underfunded.
Right.
If they had to pay out all they owed right now, they would be way short.
And they're not going to have to do that. I mean, everybody's not going to retire at once. But the folks who study this and go to college for a long time to understand these financial issues, a lot of them say that PERS is underfunded, and what caused this current debate is a PERS board voted. They have the authority to increase the amount that governmental agencies pump into the system, and they voted to increase that amount, and that especially the cities and counties, those governmental entities really started complaining that they couldn't afford that increase, that it would lead to people being laid off as services cut, and the House took the sort of, some people thought, drastic step of dissolving the PERS board, whose members are elected by the membership, by the retirees and the current public employees, and appointing that board with a board appointed by politicians. Now, the Senate didn't go along with that, but the Senate has proposed stripping the board of that authority to increase the employer contribution rate and leaving that to the legislature to do, perhaps based on recommendations from the board. And it appears that's going to be a compromise, and part of that compromise also would be that the state would put some general fund money or some state money into the system to prop it up, and so that increase that would not be placed on the local governments. And so
for now,
that's right.
Just high level analysis. It seems like both of those major issues do have compromise, but as we sit here right now, we don't have final votes yet.
Yeah, but I think I think if we can argue that Medicaid is moving toward a compromise and perhaps passage, I think those two issues are closer to passage, closer to agreement, and
far better odds on those two, perhaps, than Medicaid.
And we talked about several times in this podcast that those were the three issues that were going to be the most difficult to solve this session.
We said it, I think, in late December, and we're saying it here in the last week of session 2. So
it seems like this on several of these podcasts we talked about 2/3 votes several times, and that reminds me of former Speaker Billy McCoy. He was fun to say, you can get 2/3 votes, you can do whatever you want to in this building.
Well, certainly feels true right now, and it's been like I said earlier, it's been a lot of fun covering this with y'all, and I say covering this. I guess I haven't been covering it the way y'all have been.
Oh, no, you have to.
It's I think that Mississippi is so lucky to have y'all, and I think we at Mississippi Today are proud to serve that role of being the eyes and ears of the public in the building, and we're at the end of yet another one, and y'all.
I think we're near the end.
Well, that's right. I guess they can extend it.
We didn't mention they still have to actually by roughly 2 days from now have a $7 billion budget.
That's right. That's right.
Just casual.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, I have my fingers crossed that they've been working on that behind the scenes, and they're close to having that done. And by the way, part of the MAP rewrite, there's going to be about $220 million additional funds put in education. So that'll be for this coming year. So that'll be a big thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, y'all, thank you for your time today. Thank you for I'll say thank you in advance for working the weekend. So by the time people are listening to this, you can know that Geoff Pender and Bobby Harrison have been working the previous weekend to provide you all the information you need from the Capitol. But look forward to talking more. Hopefully the next time we record one of these podcasts, it'll be done and we can do a true postmort rather than having to preface things and sort of try to guess what's coming next. But Geoff and Bobby, thank y'all for being here, and thanks for all you do.
Thanks,
guys.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That address is podcast@MississippiToday.org. Y'all can also reach out to me or any of my colleagues through social media or email. And as always, thank you for your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/theotherside. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.